What is up, everyone, and welcome back to Today Assets Report, your home for real financial news, real signals, and real talk about what's actually moving in the markets. Happy Monday, March 2nd, and let me just say, another month down, another month closer to something massive. Q1 is nearly in the books, Q2 is knocking on the door, and if you thought the first quarter was full of fireworks, buckle up, because what's building right now makes everything we've seen so far look like a warm-up act. Today, we're breaking down one of the most important developments in the entire crypto and financial space, something that is quietly reshaping how trillions of dollars in assets are going to move across the globe. And the wild part? Most people haven't even connected the dots yet. We're talking about BlackRock, the single largest asset manager on the face of this planet, sitting on over $5 trillion in assets. And their most recent move is one that every XRP holder, every crypto investor, and honestly every person with money in the traditional markets needs to hear right now. So stay locked in because this one matters. Lee S. just set the stage here because context is everything. BlackRock is not a startup. BlackRock is not experimenting for fun. When BlackRock's CFO, Martin Small, a name that doesn't always make the headlines but absolutely should, steps forward and announces that they plan to tokenize every single one of their ETFs within the next 3 to 12 months, you need to stop and lay that land. Not some of their ETFs, not a pilot program, not a test run on a handful of funds, every single ETF. We are talking about stocks, bonds, funds, the entire iShares catalog, wrapped into blockchain-based infrastructure and turned into programmable, transferable digital assets. Now, for most people in the retail crypto world, that sentence might not fully click yet. But for institutions, for banks, for the people moving serious capital, that statement is a 5-alarm signal. When a firm the size of BlackRock puts something on a 3 to 12-month timeline, it is not a maybe. It is not a wishful projection. That is a done deal. That is something already in motion, already being built behind closed doors, and already closer to reality than most people watching price charts have any idea about. Here's the thing that makes this so important, and here's where XRP enters the picture in a very serious way. Think about what XRP was actually engineered to do from the ground up: cross-border settlement, institutional liquidity routing, high-speed payment rails that can handle the kind of transaction volume that traditional financial systems choke on. XRP was built for exactly the world that BlackRock is now trying to create. If you are going to tokenize trillions of dollars in traditional financial assets and move them on-chain, you need infrastructure that can handle that. You need interoperability, the ability for different systems and different blockchains to talk to each other and settle value seamlessly. You need liquidity corridors so the capital can flow instantly without getting stuck in bottlenecks. You need settlement speed that doesn't take 2 to 3 business days to clear like the current system. And when you lay all of those requirements side by side, XRP is the answer that keeps showing up. Not Bitcoin, not Ethereum. XRP. That is not hype, that is engineering. And BlackRock is building an environment where that kind of infrastructure doesn't just become useful, it becomes absolutely necessary. Now, I want to be precise here because this is important. BlackRock is not publicly loading bags of XRP right now. They're not coming out on a press release saying, "We love XRP, buy it." That's not how institutional positioning works, and if you've been in this space long enough, you already know that. What they are doing is building the rails, the framework, the on-chain environment that assets like XRP were literally designed to operate within. There is a massive difference between chasing price and building infrastructure. Retail chases price. Institutions build infrastructure. BlackRock is not here to speculate. They are here to construct the financial system of the next decade, and in doing so, they are creating demand for exactly the kind of cross-chain, high-liquidity, compliance-ready settlement assets that XRP represents. When the largest asset manager on Earth builds a train station, you want to own the railroad. And right now, the tracks are being laid in real time, whether you're paying attention or not. And BlackRock is far from the only signal firing right now. Ellie's talk about Bitwise, because this is a name you need to have on your radar if you don't already. Bitwise is the second largest XRP ETF issuer in the entire market right now, and they have made a move that most people completely glossed over. Bitwise has locked up over 190.2 million XRP inside their ETF structures. Let that number sit with you for a second. Over 190 million XRP. gone from circulating supply, sitting inside institutional products, removed from the trading market. In this space, we call that removed liquidity. When supply shrinks and demand grows, you already know what happens to price. But beyond the market mechanics, what Bitwise is doing here tells you something much deeper about how serious institutional players view XRP's long-term role. Bitwise manages billions across multiple crypto ETF products. These are not people making emotional decisions. These are structured, deliberate, research-backed allocations. You don't lock up 190 million of any asset on a whim. You do it because you believe in the infrastructure thesis, and the infrastructure thesis for XRP has never been stronger. Let me add another layer to the Bitwise story, because there's something even bigger embedded in what they said recently. Bitwise pointed out something that I think is one of the most underappreciated dynamics in all of crypto right now: the regulatory moat. For years, companies like Coinbase and Circle were able to build enormous market share, not just because they were good, but because hostile regulations kept well-funded competitors from entering the space. Think about what the brokerage market looks like in traditional finance. You've got Schwab, Fidelity, Interactive Brokers, E-Trade, and dozens of others all competing for your dollars. That kind of competition never happened in crypto because the regulatory environment was so punishing that building a competitor was nearly impossible. So Coinbase ended up with market share it probably shouldn't have had in a fair fight, and Circle ended up dominating stable coins in a way that no single player should dominate any market. But here's the flip side. Now that regulations are softening, that moat doesn't disappear overnight. Those incumbents keep their lead, and the firms that position themselves inside that ecosystem like Bitwise are sitting in a very powerful place as the doors finally start to open. Now, let's bring Brad Garlinghouse into this conversation, because Brad has been dropping signals, and if you know Brad, you know he does not say things publicly without a reason. Brad just confirmed that the talks between banks and the crypto industry are gaining serious, real momentum. Active negotiations are still happening. Now, I've seen the social media crowd, people with no seat at the table, no access to these meetings, no first-hand knowledge, saying the Clarity Act is dying, it's over, it's not going to happen. But here's what I'd ask you to think about. Brad Garlinghouse has been in those rooms. Stuart Alderoty is still attending those meetings. These are not people who would come out publicly and gas up investor enthusiasm if the floor was caving in. That's not how you build trust, and that's not how Ripple has operated. When Brad specifically calls out stable coin yield models and economic frameworks being discussed between traditional banks and crypto firms, he is describing something that has nothing to do with retail. That is, regulated financial institutions sitting at the same table, working through the details of how traditional banking and blockchain infrastructure are going to coexist and collaborate. This is one of the most important things I can stress to you today, and I want you to really absorb this. Banks do not experiment publicly. Banks do not announce partnerships before they're ready. Banks prepare in the dark, quietly, for months and sometimes years, and then they flip the switch and the world changes overnight. Retail investors always feel like it happened out of nowhere because they weren't watching the build. But the build has been happening. Regulatory uncertainty is what kept so many banks on the sidelines for so long. Not disinterest, not skepticism about blockchain, just the inability to operate in a legal gray zone when you have regulators breathing down your neck. Now that tone has completely shifted. Financial institutions are being encouraged, not just permitted, but actively encouraged, to engage with crypto infrastructure in good faith. The door isn't just open anymore. Someone is holding it open and waving people through. And when those banks come through that door looking for crypto infrastructure to integrate, they are not reaching for meme coins. They are reaching for assets that have compliance history, legal battle scars, and enterprise-grade rails built in. That describes exactly one asset in this entire space. And speaking of regulatory shifts, let's talk about what's happening in Washington right now, because the temperature has changed dramatically. Treasury Secretary Bessent recently made a statement that would have sounded absolutely impossible just 2 years ago. The administration is actively working to remove regulatory barriers against Bitcoin and crypto. Remove. Barriers. Those are two words we have not heard from the U.S. Treasury in this context before. For years, almost a decade, for those of us who've been in this space since early days, every piece of government communication around crypto was about restriction, caution, risk, and uncertainty. Now, the language coming from the top of the Treasury is pro-infrastructure. It's enabling. It's forward-looking. And when the regulatory framework shifts from restrictive to enabling, something very specific happens. Capital starts moving, not cautiously, not slowly. Real institutional capital, the kind that moves markets for years, starts finding its footing and deploying at scale. That is the environment we are walking into right now, and the timing of all these signals happening simultaneously is not a coincidence. I want to paint you a picture of what convergence looks like, because all of these pieces, BlackRock tokenizing ETFs, Bitwise locking XRP supply, banks actively negotiating crypto partnerships, Washington easing regulatory friction. These are not separate stories. They are chapters of the same book. When tokenized assets need to move across chains, they need settlement infrastructure. When banks integrate crypto rails, they need compliance-ready assets. When regulators open the door, institutional capital walks through with a checklist, and the first boxes they check are legal history, technology track record, and enterprise scalability. XRP has been building toward exactly this moment for years, not months, years. And the painful irony is that the very thing that caused so much frustration for XRP holders, the SEC lawsuit, the years of uncertainty, the regulatory battle, is the exact thing that gave XRP a compliance credibility that no other asset in this space has earned. Every other major crypto got a free pass. XRP fought for its legitimacy and won, and that battle-tested history is now an asset, not a liability. Let me give you a historical lens on this because I think it makes the entire picture snap into focus. Think about Amazon in the years following the dot-com crash. When the bubble burst, everyone laughed at internet companies. Investors who had piled into early tech stocks got wiped out and swore off the whole sector. But the people who looked past the noise and understood what Amazon was actually building, logistics, cloud infrastructure, fulfillment networks, distribution at scale, those people held through the pain and were rewarded beyond anything they imagined. Amazon didn't explode because Jeff Bezos went on TV and hyped it up. It exploded because the infrastructure it quietly built became indispensable to the entire economy. When the plumbing was done and the world needed it, the price followed the value, and it followed hard. Now look at what XRP has been building. Cross-border payment infrastructure, institutional liquidity corridors, global settlement rails that work at a speed and cost that the traditional system simply cannot match. The playbook is almost identical, and the moment of convergence is approaching fast. Here is what I really want you to understand about infrastructure investing, because this is the mindset that separates the people who build wealth in these moments from the people who watch it happen from the sidelines. Infrastructure always gets built before mass adoption. Always. The roads get paved before the cars drive on them. The pipes get laid before the water flows through them. The servers get built before the internet goes mainstream. Right now, the blockchain infrastructure that the global financial system is going to run on in 5 to 10 years is being constructed by BlackRock, Bitwise, Ripple, and a network of banks and regulators who are finally all pushing in the same direction. And XRP sits at the center of that construction project in a way that no other asset does. The average retail investor is still staring at a price chart asking why it hasn't moved yet. But the right question isn't why hasn't it moved? The right question is, why are the largest institutions on Earth building around it right now? Because by the time the price chart gives you the obvious signal, the positioning phase is already over. Now, I know some of you are sitting there thinking, okay, this all sounds incredible, but where's the proof? Where's the smoking gun that connects all of this to XRP specifically? And I want to address that directly because I think it's a fair question and it deserves a real answer. The proof is not in a single headline. The proof is in the pattern. BlackRock tokenizes assets on-chain. XRP is on-chain settlement infrastructure. Bitwise accumulates 190 million XRP inside an ETF product. That's direct institutional exposure. Brad Garlinghouse confirms bank negotiations are active and advancing. Ripple's technology is the bridge between banking and blockchain. Washington removes regulatory barriers. XRP, the only major crypto to have survived a full SEC legal confrontation and emerged with a court ruling, is now the most legally validated digital asset in the United States. Every single data point in this story points to the same conclusion. You don't need someone to hand you a memo. The memo is being written by the market itself, and it's being written in real time. I also want to take a moment to talk about supply dynamics, because when you combine everything we've discussed today with the basic economics of supply and demand, the picture gets even more interesting. Bitwise alone has removed over 190 million XRP from available trading supply. That number is going to grow as more ETF products get approved and more institutional products come to market. At the same time, Ripple continues to execute on its global payments vision, signing partnerships with financial institutions that are actually using XRP for real cross-border transactions. Not testing it, not piloting it, but using it in live production environments. As demand from tokenized asset settlement, bank integrations, and ETF accumulation grows, and as supply continues to shrink because it's being locked into institutional products, the pressure on price becomes a structural reality rather than a speculative hope. This is not the same as someone on the internet saying XRP to $10 by Tuesday. This is basic market mechanics playing out on an institutional scale, and it is extremely bullish. So let me bring this all home for you, because I want you to leave today's episode with absolute clarity on what the big picture looks like. BlackRock is tokenizing every ETF within the next 3 to 12 months. Bitwise is accumulating and locking XRP supply at institutional scale. Brad Garlinghouse is confirming that bank crypto negotiations are alive, active, and moving forward. Treasury Secretary Bessent is declaring that the U.S. government is removing regulatory roadblocks for crypto infrastructure. And XRP, the only major digital asset to have fought the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission in open court and come out the other side with legal validation, sits at the intersection of every single one of these storylines. This is not chaos. This is alignment. And alignment of this magnitude across this many institutional actors in this short a window of time is what the beginning of a structural market shift looks like. The signal is already there. The infrastructure is already being built. The only question left is whether you're going to be positioned before the crowd finally connects the dots or after. And on Today Assets Report, we always want you ahead of the curve. That is why we are here. Stay sharp, stay patient, stay positioned. Like this video if it brought you value, subscribe if you haven't already, and we will see every single one of you in the next one.